Let's go, folks. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Bob from Bobby Broadcast Delhi with this news on this lovely October Tuesday. The first is PLA rotates LAC troops, shows hands. PLA is rotating 200 troops at a time, so the frontline troops are fresh and motivated. This clearly means that PLA has no plans for disengagement at least this winter. Not only does it have no plans for disengagement, the problem is motivation. They are having problems with motivating these troops. This is something that our planners should take on board. It's important. The other part that is, I'm glad that these two countries are being put together as one. Border disputes appear to be a Pak-China mission, Rajnath. And then it says Pak-China are creating border disputes under a mission, Rajnath. This is important. Now that we know this is just one border, the question is, where should we hit? Idea should be, I believe there's two divisions or two brigades being put by the Pakistani army in Gilgit and Baltistan. There's also news that there were Pakistani soldiers involved in Galwan. India now needs to to bell the can, call the spade a spade, just like the Ministry of Defense is doing. And our target has to be Gilgit and Baltistan, because that's our connection to Afghanistan and Central Asia. If there was one piece of territory, real estate, that was critical for India, it is Gilgit and Baltistan. Okay, now let's go on to some economic news. There we go. Yashwant Sinha, never waste a crisis. Instead of focusing on non-issues, India and fixing opponents, government should borrow and spend money wisely. He says the prescription for getting out of the slowdown was suggested by many economists, but the government had no use for it. It refused to believe that demand deceleration was the root cause of the malaise and kept trying other expensive measures. And then he goes on to say, and he quotes John Keynes, which suggested that people should be engaged in digging ditches and then filling them up. It was in order to ensure that money reached people's pockets so that demand could accelerate. I hear what he says is, India has millions of rural roads, provide housing to all, build new cities and villages with modern facilities, improve health and educational facilities, construct national highways, railways, lines, airports, ports, promote defense and tourism infrastructure. There are the ditches we must start digging today. Create demand. And this is absolutely not the way to create demand, where it says government unveils plans to boost demand. Stimulus expected to give economy a fillip of 1 lakh crore, says finance. What is this fillip? Is government to spend 37,000 crores, give SOPs to spur festive demand, cash for LTC and 10,000 advance for central staffer. These are the most spoiled group of people in India. Central staffers, security of job, roof above their head. Why would you keep pumping them up? The demand deceleration has happened in the MSMEs, SMEs. You really need to get out there and spend on capital. This is again the expense side which has absolutely no capital accumulation. This is absolutely the wrong way to go. The only thing that is done right is essentially, obviously, it's got the demand right finally. That demand deceleration is the key. Now, next is a funny note, 14 transactions of IFCO, its CEO red flag to US watchdog. IFCO denies transaction, says CEO MD, not directly involved in procurement. Anybody who's big in phosphatic fertilizers as far as is concerned will know that not all is well with our PSUs. There is a huge amount of corruption, and this is going to get a lot of worms out of the woodwork. More after the break. Welcome, folks. Now for some election news. Not so good for Trump's, but great news for LA fans, LA Lakers fans. As you all know, that they won the title. LeBron James, the man of the moment. Incredible stuff. I'm amazing Lakers fans, as is my son, as it seems to be almost everybody who follows basketball in India. Great news for sport. However, not so great news for Donald Trump. As we go along, there's an article by Chidanand Rajgata, America heading for post-election strife. Both parties preparing for legal fight over vote. There are increasingly ominous signs that the US is heading towards post-election strife with massive distrust over voting procedures and counting of ballots. This is something, this is amazing. And the current president has just done this and created this incredible amount of distrust about a democracy that we all used to follow. This is absolutely, I'm not even sure what to say, shameful. What does the rest of the democracies that follow do? But this is only if, I believe, if there's a close fight. If there is a huge wipeout, as a lot of notes suggest, then I don't think Trump is going to be able to convolute the democratic system. I think then the institutions will come into full play, including the Supreme Court. But events seem to have caught up with the news cycle as far as Trump is concerned. Some days back, you had candidates enter key stretch in campaign. What it said is, we still believe that is a referendum on Donald Trump. You know, he's desperately tried to change that, and it really hasn't happened, said Mike Donnellan, a top strategist for Mr. Biden. And Trump has not helped. Not after the debate, and not after him getting coronavirus, and not after going there and making White House a hot spot for coronavirus. Now the news is only Trump. Even if he tried or didn't try, that's what's happening. You had a report earlier, scaring voters didn't work in 2018. Will it now? That's a question. Democrats worry that GOP message may sway the suburbs. This was news coming out earlier, but it now seems, based on the recent polls that have been done, that women, the critical components of women, the older white people, the suburbs are swinging the Biden way in all the swing states. There was another article which again events have overtaken in a campaign of stark contrast. It is defiance versus caution. Now the defiance is actually working against Trump, and caution by Biden has worked in his favor. There's a report which says Biden keeps national lead over Trump mainly because of virus poll finds, and that's becoming extremely important, and more so after what happened with Trump and his attempt to project the economy. Another report suggests Trump's lead on economy appears vulnerable. Polling suggests an erosion of the advantage the president had held over rival Joe Biden, and Biden is working to exploit the shift. Pennsylvania, some days ago, poll puts Biden ahead of Trump by 9 points in Pennsylvania. That figure has stayed more or less static. Battle for Rust Belt workers builds in Michigan, and as events have overtaken the whole process, it just seems that Biden's grip on Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin has improved a lot, right? Then you have an article which says Biden sharpens pitch to white working class. He says Joe Biden is amplifying his pitch to the working class white voters who propelled Donald Trump in 2016, putting the president on the defensive as his coronavirus diagnosis took him off the trail. That's really important. Like I said, events have really overtaken the news cycle for Trump. Since he secured the nomination in early April, the Biden campaign has spent $96 million on television advertisements across Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, according to data from the political ad tracker Kantar CMAG. That is nearly 3 times the $36 million spent across the states by the Trump campaign. All right. Now, what's everybody else saying? It says, could South Carolina really send a Democrat to the U.S. Senate? If Jamie Harrison beats the Republican incumbent, Lindsey Graham, in November, he'd be the first Democratic challenger to win a Senate seat in the states in 1960. But polls in recent weeks have shown Harrison neck to neck. And his poll raised $57 million in the third quarter of the year, breaking the record previously held by Beto O'Rourke in Texas. Actually not breaking, smashing. Democratic Senate challengers across the country have received record cash donations this year as liberal voters express their outrage with President Trump. The nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett to replace Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court has fired up the Democratic base even further. Like I said, this could be an albatross around Trump's neck, right? What is happening here, right, is important. The president's political environment is terrible, said Ed Rollins, a longtime Republican operative who now advises a super PAC supporting President Trump. It's an uphill battle. But in private, he says, it's cooked. in private, Republicans offer an even more dire assessment of the president's charges, rattling off a litany of recent missteps, including his erratic debate performance, his failure to protect himself or much of his White House from coronavirus, and his inability to drive a closing message. Many fear a Trump-driven catastrophe up and down the ticket, one that would cost Republicans control of the Senate and further shrink their ranks in the House. The president has lost key parts of his 2016 coalition, suburbanites, older voters, white women, and has been unable to woo them back with warnings about violent protests, anarchy, and socialism. Democrats, as it said, are raising record sums of campaign cash. Record. Most of the people, senators up for re-elections, are trying to build a gap between themselves and Trump. He says the most glaring example in recent days came from Senator Martha McSally, the endangered Arizona incumbent, who refused to say whether she was proud of her support for Mr. Trump. And similarly, Senator John Cornyn of Texas, facing a closer than expected re-election race, told the Houston Chronicle that the president let his guard down. Even Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky announced that he hasn't visited the White House since August. Can you imagine Mitch McConnell himself? Interesting times. But here's one small item that might play an important role. Ireland is on the ballot in Pennsylvania, especially after Brexit. This seems to have become a hot button point. As it says, more than 16% of Pennsylvania's population claims Irish ancestry, higher than the national average. And many of those voters' warnings from experts have been eye-catching. Very interesting. Who would have thought Irish Americans back in play? And finally, still for those voters who do prioritize the United States' relationship with Ireland, the country's sudden relevance could be a game changer. I think this is an important constituency, Boyle said, and I'm glad that Biden campaign is paying attention to it. Cheers, folks. More after the break. Game of Vichy, shifting sands. Sri Lanka, obviously they got a year full from their Chinese masters and they're back in the Chinese camp, so what was turning blue is now moved back into orange. Afghanistan, I think, continues to be in play. India has a lot more advantages than China and Pakistan, because Pakistan is losing all kind of control. Interesting news coming out of CNN IBN that Pakistan is actually selling 2 islands of Sindh to China. This is a moment for India to create as much disturbance as possible in Sindh. Sindh always wanted to be a part of India, historically. I think it is time for India to to light the fire a little bit more. And here's what finally, before we go on to what we do with the Quad, top US diplomat calls for expansion of Quad group. What it goes ahead and says, the United States and India are ready for a fundamental alignment based on shared interests and shared goals. US Deputy Secretary of State Stephen Biegun said on Monday. Biegun said this was not about an alliance on the post-war model, but an alignment along shared security and geopolitical goals. Folks, I'm going to expand on this. Quad is going to become a lot more important to India as you see what Pakistan's up to, selling islands, Sri Lanka shifting back. India's advantage is in the seas. And you see that stretched all the way from Australia all the way to Mauritius here. Jai Hind.
Think of natural products. Think of Sada Jeevan.